Ever wonder what happens when a hero throws away the one person who kept his party alive? Rick was just an alchemist, brewing potions, supporting his team, giving everything he had. Then the hero looked him in the eye and told him he was worthless. But the thing about being cast aside is, sometimes you land somewhere you were always meant to be.
Dungeons, massive labyrinths crawling with monsters and traps, where reckless adventurers throw themselves in chasing treasure and glory. Some of these dungeons are ranked so impossibly high that no sane person would ever step inside them. And yet, one particular hero's party just conquered the worst of them all. Hero Alan's crew cleared the legendary Ouroboros dungeon, and the whole kingdom is losing its mind over it. Tavern regulars are calling them living legends, the kind of party that can turn any hopeless situation around through sheer power. But even legends, apparently, aren't above doing something truly ugly behind closed doors. Rick Elord is an alchemist. His whole job is brewing potions and crafting support items for the party. He's good at it too, genuinely excited every time he finishes a new creation, practically glowing when he holds up a fresh potion. The kid lives and breathes alchemy, and he's been riding with Alan's party since the beginning. Alan shows up at Rick's door saying he needs to talk, and Rick doesn't even hesitate. He shoves a new potion into the hero's hands first, proud of what he's made. But Alan isn't here to talk shop. The conversation takes a sharp, cold turn that Rick never saw coming. Alan looks Rick dead in the eyes and tells him he's been replaced. A better alchemist has been found. Rick's face just crumbles, total disbelief washing over him as the words hit. The hero he's followed and supported all this time is cutting him loose without flinching. The new alchemist steps forward with a smug grin, adjusting her glasses like she's been waiting for this moment. Her name is Dorma Gregan, and she wastes no time making sure Rick knows she exists. She tells him he probably doesn't remember her, and adds coldly that they were never friends anyway. Alan doesn't stop there. He tells Rick he's been an eyesore for a long time, and calls him a carefree research idiot dragging down the party. The words land like a punch to the gut, each one more brutal than the last. Rick can barely get a word out before Alan declares flatly that he isn't suitable for the party. Rick tries to push back, reminding Alan they've known each other since the beginning, that he and Victor go way back. But Alan's room is already being handed over to Dorma, and Rick is being told to leave like a stranger. The hero claims it was a decision made by all the party members, and Rick's desperate cry of disbelief echoes off the walls. Alan walks away without looking back, telling Dorma to get ready for the next dungeon conquest. Rick stands there stunned, watching everything he built disappear in seconds. Another party member mutters that it's pitiful, but nobody lifts a finger to stop it. Alan's word is final. Dorma rubs salt in the wound, handing Rick a potion and telling him that since he was in the hero's party, she assumed he had some skill. She examines what he can make and declares him completely inferior to her. Rick's jaw clenches as humiliation piles on top of betrayal, and he's left with nothing but the clothes on his back. Rick wanders out of town alone, crushed and directionless, muttering to himself that being an alchemist is all he knows. He stumbles through the wilderness with no party, no purpose, and no idea what comes next. Then he hears something, a faint voice calling out from the trees, begging for help. He finds a girl collapsed on the ground, barely conscious, with strange wings shimmering behind her. She's gasping for breath and pleading for someone, anyone, to save her. Rick rushes over without thinking, because that's just who he is, the kind of guy who helps first and asks questions later. The girl introduces herself as Yuri, a dungeon spirit, and Rick's eyes go wide because he's only ever read about them in books. She's being chased by a werewolf that's still lurking nearby, snarling through the undergrowth. Rick realizes fast that fighting a monster like this alone is way beyond what an alchemist can handle. Yuri gasps out that if making a contract with her would help him, they should do it right now. Rick doesn't fully understand what that means, but the werewolf is closing in, and there's no time to debate. He agrees, and Yuri's eyes light up with desperate hope as she reaches for his hand. A blinding flash of energy erupts between them, and suddenly Rick is holding some kind of power he's never felt before. Yuri is overjoyed, thanking him for making the contract and calling him master with tears in her eyes. The werewolf roars behind them, clearly not done yet, and Rick realizes his life just changed in ways he can't even begin to process. Yuri explains that she's been searching for a master for 9 long years, and dungeon spirits die if they can't form a contract within 10 years of being born. She calls herself a failure, voice cracking, but then her face breaks into the warmest smile as she says how happy she is that Rick accepted her. Rick stares at her and feels something shift inside his chest. This girl's loneliness mirrors his own. Rick tells Yuri he doesn't know how much he can do, but he'll give it everything he's got to build a great dungeon. Yuri's response is immediate and overwhelming. She promises to stay by his side forever, to listen to whatever he says, to never leave. She tackles him in a hug so enthusiastic it nearly knocks him over, and Rick can barely breathe through her gratitude. But then Yuri drops the other shoe. Once you make a contract, you become the dungeon master, and you have to fight off attacking adventurers and monsters. Rick's face goes pale as the reality sinks in. He was just kicked out of a hero's party, and now he's literally on the opposite side of the battlefield from people like Alan. Yuri cheerfully tells him not to worry, and offers to show him how everything works, completely unbothered by his existential crisis. She pledges to do anything her master orders, which makes Rick gulp nervously for entirely different reasons. The chapter closes with Rick staring into the void, realizing he just became an enemy of humanity, and he'll have to face Alan himself someday. Chapter 2 kicks off with a crash course in dungeon management, and Rick is reading through the catalog like a kid in a candy store. Dungeon points fuel everything: monsters, traps, items, even building his own personal workshop. Rick's alchemist brain is firing on all cylinders, already dreaming up possibilities, while Yuri cheerfully reminds him that none of this changes the fact that he's now public enemy number 1. Rick surveys his dungeon's monster lineup, and the situation is not great. His entire defense force is a handful of G-rank goblins and slimes, literally the weakest creatures that exist. The monster eggs hatch randomly, and the odds of pulling 5 bottom-tier duds in a row is only 3%, which means Rick's luck is cosmically terrible. Meanwhile, back with Alan's hero party, things aren't going so hot either. Turns out kicking your alchemist might have consequences. Alan is chewing out every single member after a botched dungeon run, calling out Matilda the mage for using the wrong element, and Fitz the martial artist for ignoring orders. Victor the tank and Mary the healer watch nervously as the hero tears into everyone with zero patience. Dorma sits at the table getting an earful too, and Alan isn't pulling punches with his so-called upgrade. He tells her she's been awful since she joined. Bad support timing, terrible item management, wrong pursuit calls, everything. Dorma's smug confidence from earlier is completely gone, replaced by stammering apologies as Alan asks if her promise of perfection was just a joke. The party limps through dinner in awkward silence, with someone muttering they were too relaxed after the trash left. Mary the healer tries to cheer Dorma up, but Alan slams his fist down in pure frustration. He rages that the dungeon they failed was only S rank, and as a hero he needs to be clearing SSS rank. So why is his own party holding him back? Alan storms off alone, seething about how close he was to clearing that level and blaming bad luck for the failure. He mutters that if he just had a certain something, he could have handled it solo. Back in his room surrounded by potions, Rick's name hangs unspoken in the air, and then Alan spots something in his notes about monster synthesis. Rick, completely unaware of Alan's meltdown, is busy in his dungeon workshop figuring out how alchemy translates to dungeon management. He explains to Yuri that monster synthesis is an alchemy technique, combining creatures to rank them up. It's not his specialty since he focused on potions, but he once read about it in a book and memorized the process because that's just how alchemists work. Yuri is stunned that Rick can casually recall advanced synthesis formulas from a single glance at a textbook. Rick shrugs it off like it's nothing special, already calculating the DP cost and mapping out how to upgrade his pathetic G-rank monsters to D-rank. The two of them dive into the experiment immediately, giddy with the possibility of actually building a real defense. Monsters start popping into existence one after another: hobgoblins, slimes, kobolds, and more goblins tumbling out of synthesis eggs. Rick groans about his bad luck since most of them are still low-ranked trash. But Yuri cheerfully reminds him he can use synthesis to combine them, and that's when things get interesting. Rick synthesizes a kobold and a goblin together, and instead of getting the expected D to F rank result, a massive A-rank behemoth materializes in the dungeon hall. Yuri's jaw drops. Normally synthesis only boosts monsters 3 ranks, but Rick just jumped 6. She tells him breathlessly that he can create monsters that exceed the normal limits, and Rick can barely process what he's looking at. Rick is floored by his own hidden talent, staring at his hands like they belong to someone else. Yuri beams and tells him everyone has an area where their skills shine, and that being a dungeon master might actually be his destiny. For the first time since getting kicked out, Rick's eyes light up with real excitement as they agree to start the next synthesis right away. A flashback hits. Rick remembers the good days, back when he was still part of Alan's party and genuinely happy. He'd lose himself in experiments for hours, tweaking potion effects for each party member, always thinking about how to give everyone the best support. He'd rush into meetings late with armfuls of custom-brewed potions, so obsessed with his craft that Victor would laugh and call him a potion freak. Rick had tailored a special stamina potion just for Victor. Shorter recovery time, but enhanced defense, perfectly matched to how Victor fights. He put that kind of thought into everything he made, studying each teammate's combat style to optimize their loadouts. It was the kind of obsessive, loving attention to detail that only someone who truly cared about their team would bother with. But Rick also remembers the truth that crept in slowly. The party got stronger, added a healer and a mage, and gradually there were fewer things only he could do. Alan started telling him he was only kept around for his golden potions, that his other work was just a hobby nobody needed. The memory stings because Rick knows he gave everything he had, and it still wasn't enough for them. Back in the present, Rick looks over his dungeon's defenses and spots something in the crystal ball. An adventurer has entered. The intruder came alone, and based on his equipment, Yuri estimates he's B or C rank at best. She notes he wouldn't stand a chance against the Cyclops even with a group of 10, and Rick watches the screen with a knot forming in his stomach. The behemoth is 6 ranks above a goblin, something that shouldn't even exist in a dungeon this new. Rick stares at the impossibility he created and wonders what it means, while Yuri murmurs cryptically that it might be fate. Then suddenly, she spins around with wide eyes. An intruder has breached the dungeon entrance. Rick watches through the crystal ball as the adventurer pushes deeper into his dungeon, completely unaware of what's waiting for him. The tension builds in Rick's chest because this isn't a monster or a training dummy. This is a real person walking toward real danger. He's about to find out what it actually means to be on the other side of the dungeon equation. The adventurer doesn't make it. Rick's monsters do their job, and the dungeon earns its first batch of DP from a real encounter. 2,500 points total, with 1,500 coming from the B-rank adventurer himself. Yuri celebrates excitedly, but Rick just stands there staring at the earnings breakdown with a hollow look on his face. Something is wrong, and Rick knows it. He just watched someone die in his dungeon, and he didn't feel a single thing. No guilt, no remorse, nothing. Yuri asks what's bothering him, and he brushes it off with a quiet nothing, but internally the unease is eating him alive. Rick can't sleep that night, tossing on the hard stone floor, while Yuri offers to keep watch since spirits don't need rest. He finally breaks the silence and tells her about yesterday, how he watched the adventurer die and felt absolutely nothing. The confession hangs between them like a cold fog, and Rick asks the question he's terrified to hear answered. Yuri explains gently that when Rick made the contract, he became one with her and the dungeon itself. For a dungeon spirit, people dying inside the labyrinth is just part of the natural cycle. It's how they survive. Rick's face crumbles as he asks if he's no longer human, but Yuri pulls him close and tells him it doesn't matter. He's still her master, the only one who can be dungeon master of this place, and that's enough. Word is spreading about a mysterious new dungeon in the woods outside Alraj, and nobody can figure it out. It's been a month since its discovery, but there's zero information on how to clear it. Even experienced mappers who went in to chart the layout never came back. The internal structure and monster distribution should be common knowledge by now for a G-rank dungeon, but this one is different. A party decides to challenge it anyway, and they walk straight into a nightmare they never expected. High-rank monsters that have no business existing in a G-rank dungeon tear through them without mercy. One adventurer screams that it's impossible, while another promises his mother he'll make a name for himself, a promise he'll never get to keep. The sole survivor stumbles out of the dungeon in shock, and the other adventurers at the entrance can barely believe what she's describing. Randall's party was known for their solid strategy, but every single member except this girl is dead. She insists the monsters moved like they were being controlled, reading their every move, and that someone deliberately let her live. The other adventurers dismiss her claims as trauma, telling her she's lucky to be alive and to count her blessings. But the survivor keeps repeating that she should have died in there. Someone allowed her to return. Back inside the dungeon, that someone is Rick, watching the whole thing through his crystal ball with a very specific plan in mind. Rick tells Yuri to let the girl go, and Yuri is confused because they've been annihilating every intruder up to this point. Rick explains that killing everyone every time is actually a mistake. If the dungeon's popularity drops, adventurers will stop coming and they'll lose their source of DP. Leaving a sole survivor to spread terrifying stories is actually better for business. Yuri congratulates Rick with a massive grin. The dungeon's rank has just increased to F after accumulating 10,000 DP. She presents the rank up like a proud teacher handing out a gold star, and the dungeon entrance physically transforms to look more imposing. Rick asks about the updated catalog, and his eyes light up when he realizes he can now create even better alchemy tools. Rick digs into the new catalog options and discovers that being a dungeon master is basically his dream job. Yuri tells him this was always his ideal role, and Rick can't argue. The dungeon gives him the perfect lab environment. He's already planning his next synthesis experiment before the celebration confetti has even settled. Rick's mind wanders back to his early days, remembering when Mary first joined Alan's party as a healer. Alan had been blunt about Rick's potions becoming less necessary with a real healer on the team. But Rick took it in stride, telling Mary not to worry because the more she takes on, the more time he gets for research. Mary had been genuinely worried that her role as healer was making Rick obsolete, and she apologized for potentially making things worse for him. Rick just laughed it off, telling her it didn't matter and that he appreciated being in a party that kept challenging unknown dungeons. He told her she was really kind, and Mary smiled back at him with a warmth that clearly meant more than just professional courtesy. Victor backed Rick up, pointing out that the party still relied heavily on his potions for elemental countermeasures and status buffs. Alan scoffed and called Rick a research idiot who'd been coasting with one less role to worry about. But even Alan grudgingly admitted Rick's attribute potions were better than nothing, and Rick introduced himself to Mary with a handshake and his best nervous smile. That memory fades, and we cut to Mary and Victor having a private conversation over drinks about what's gone wrong with the party since Rick left. Mary says Alan hasn't seemed like himself lately, and Victor admits the change in members might be the cause. Dorma's potion quality is technically better than Rick's, but her combat movement is sluggish. So it's not the alchemist swap that's hurting Alan directly. Victor remembers Rick fondly, a potion freak who was clumsy and often didn't pay attention to his surroundings, but always smiled no matter how tough things got. Mary adds softly that Rick's positivity rescued the whole party more than once. They both know that's probably exactly why Alan kicked him out, but they also know it left a hole nothing else can fill. Victor floats the idea of bringing Rick back, but Mary shuts it down immediately. Do they really think Alan could ever apologize to someone he expelled? If Alan's performance issues are mental, suggesting he was wrong about Rick would only corner him further. The conversation trails off into awkward silence as both of them realize there's no easy fix. Back in the dungeon, Rick is pushing his synthesis experiments further than ever, wondering aloud what would happen if he combined A-rank monsters together. Yuri's eyes go wide at the ambition. He's only ever synthesized low-rank creatures before. They agree to try it as soon as the daily limit resets, both buzzing with anticipation about what kind of monstrosity they'll create. But before they can test anything, the crystal ball starts buzzing. Another intruder has entered the dungeon, and this one came alone. Rick spots the adventurer and recognizes there's something different about this one. Someone with real confidence walking through the halls solo. The dungeon's monsters mobilize as Rick watches with narrowed eyes. Rick realizes he needs to think strategically about his dungeon's growth, noting that the second half of the dungeon has weaker monsters like D-rank Cerberus and small worms. If word gets out that a behemoth-class dungeon exists here, S-rank parties will start showing up, and his current layout can't handle that. Yuri suggests spending remaining DP to expand and fortify, and Rick agrees. But something else is weighing on him. Rick tells Yuri he hasn't changed at all since becoming a dungeon master. He's still just doing research, and the powerful monsters are simply a byproduct of his experiments. Mary appears at the dungeon entrance, having tracked him down, and she can't understand how he could turn against humanity. Yuri bristles and insists she's not manipulating Rick through his anger at Alan. Rick explains calmly that he just wants to continue his research in a comfortable environment, and the dungeon gives him exactly that. He tells Mary he appreciated being in the hero's party for the discoveries it offered, but the harder Mary worked as healer, the more free time he got for experiments. In the end, he actually likes how things are going now, and he means it. Mary stares at him, trying to process that the kind boy she knew is genuinely content being an enemy of adventurers. Rick tells her plainly that he still wants her back as a friend, but not for her sake or Alan's, for himself. He apologizes and says he's not kind enough to give up his place in the dungeon for her, and Mary's face crumbles at the quiet finality of it. Chapter 6 opens with Yuri pouting, clearly annoyed about something, and Rick has absolutely no idea what he did wrong. He asks if she's upset, and she snaps that she doesn't care what kind of relationship he had with that girl from the party. Rick stammers that Mary was just a party member and he doesn't even know what Yuri is referring to. But the dungeon spirit's jealousy is written all over her face, and Rick is in way over his head. Yuri admits she's been thinking about Rick's past. She wonders if Mary was really just being kind to everyone, or if there was something special there. Rick shrugs it off, saying Mary was always nice to everybody, and probably just went through the trouble of finding him out of general concern. He shifts the conversation to dungeon business, showing off a new B-rank trait he's synthesized and asking Yuri for help with the extensive prep needed for A-rank monsters. Yuri realizes that despite being bound together by contract, she and Rick barely know each other. She wonders about his adventures before they met, the people he knew, and what shaped him into who he is. Then she launches into a bizarre tangent about how couples who rush into things get disillusioned with each other's flaws. And Rick just stares at her, completely baffled about where she's getting this relationship advice. Yuri asks Rick directly how he ended up in the hero's party in the first place, and Rick hesitates before answering. He tells her about a traveling fortune teller who visited his village and gave him a prophecy. Leave home and find Alan Cole of Alraj, and he'd have a foothold to leave his name in history. Rick admits it sounds crazy to believe in something like that, but as someone who wanted to master alchemy, he couldn't resist the possibility. Rick reflects on those early days, walking into an S-rank dungeon on the 10th floor alongside Alan's crew. He notes that Alan was proud even back then, but not yet arrogant. There was a version of the hero who actually accepted a random alchemist who showed up out of nowhere. Looking back now, Rick wonders if maybe Alan's growth didn't stop when he gained his powerful skills. Maybe that's when it started going wrong. Meanwhile, Alan's party is deep inside a dungeon and falling apart at the seams. Victor points out that Alan's skills aren't activating again, and it's not just Alan. The entire party has lost its coordination. Victor suggests retreating, but Alan explodes, telling him to shut up and threatening to send him home alone if he doesn't like it. Alan's rage boils over into something uglier as he turns on Fitz the martial artist, who apparently got injured. He tells Fitz he's finished, both as a party member and as a fighter, and threatens to replace him once they get out. Victor and Mary try to intervene, screaming at Alan to stop, but the hero coldly declares that Fitz's weak body made this outcome inevitable. Mary has had enough. She's been absent from the party headquarters for a whole day without telling anyone, and Alan's response when Victor brings it up is chilling. Just forget her. Victor pushes back, saying Mary never disappears like this, and that there are no substitutes for her. Alan dismisses him, claiming there are plenty of healers just as good, and Victor's jaw tightens as he asks who would willingly board a sinking ship. Victor finally confronts Alan directly, telling him the way things are going. Conquering SSS rank dungeons is a pipe dream, let alone uniting another party in the future. Alan snaps back, asking if Victor followed him just to play nice and be friends. Victor laughs darkly and agrees that fighters like him are a dime a dozen. But then he turns the question around. The same goes for you too, brave hero. Back in Rick's dungeon, his latest synthesis experiment has produced something that shouldn't exist, a creature with self-awareness. The newly born monster opens its eyes and immediately starts questioning its own existence, asking where it is, why the world exists, and where its consciousness came from. Yuri is stunned because dungeon monsters are supposed to be mindless servants that obey their dungeon master without question. Rick is floored by what he's created. Alchemy that produces new life with genuine self-awareness is something he's only ever read about in ancient texts. He stammers that if he's the creator, the monster might see him as a god. The creature demands to know the reason for its existence. And Rick has absolutely no answer as Yuri watches the philosophical crisis unfold with wide eyes. The new creation gets more agitated, screaming at Rick to explain who she is and why she exists. Yuri scolds the creature for yelling at her master, and an awkward chaos erupts as everyone talks over each other. Rick desperately tries to calm things down, while the self-aware monster throws an existential tantrum in the middle of his dungeon hallway. The vampire, because that's what she is, decides on her own terms how this relationship will work. She declares Rick her father since he created her, and asks if she can call Yuri mother. Yuri's face cycles through about 6 different emotions before settling on flustered acceptance. Rick